Okay, I suggest we may start just then very quickly. So, hello everyone, welcome everyone. Emilio Puccio here from the European Parliament Intergroup on Children's Rights. It is a great privilege to be with you guys today. As you know, the Intergroup on Children's Rights has been working enormously on the fight against child trafficking. So we are very, very excited today to hear from the awardees from Child 10 and have this roundtable discussion on the identification of children victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation in Europe. So we have a very interesting lineup of speakers spanning from the European institutions, several European agencies, members of the European Parliament, and the civil society organizations, and especially the awardees, people who are actually working on the ground. So we are very, very much grateful for that. So we'll now give the floor to MEP Evin Incir, who is the host of this event, for a short introduction, and then we will go just for a very short introduction, Evin, now, and then we will move on and give the floor to Jacob, who will introduce the awardees and give the floor directly to you. So just a few words of introduction from Evin Incir, the Vice Chair of the.
Thank you very much, Emilio, for the word, and thank you to Child 10 and Jakob Flatt for the cooperation. And I also, of course, want to thank my colleagues who are taking part in this round table, Mr. Onidi from the European Commission, Anna Ekstedt, Swedish Ambassador at Large for Combating Trafficking in Person on behalf of the OSCE, and colleagues from the EU agency who are doing a very important work. Identification of victims of trafficking should be a priority in all member states, and cooperation with law enforcement authorities and among all other actors involved must be strengthened. Unfortunately, we see a lot of lack of it today. I wholeheartedly, of course, also want to thank all the awardees for their work on the ground to make sure that we give a face to these children who fall victim of these heinous crimes, and we fight those very organizations which benefit from vulnerabilities of the victims, not at least children. Just a couple of months ago, I hosted an event with the UNODC for the Brussels launch of the UNODC Global Report on Trafficking in Person, where also Jakob participated. The figures shown in this report are appealing in so many ways. The percentage of children among detected victims has tripled. 50% of detected victims were trafficked for sexual exploitation and 38% for forced labor, while 6% were subjected to forced criminal activities, more than 1% also for begging. The current pandemic has hit us all in so many ways and has indeed provided a fertile ground for human trafficking, and children are more than ever exposed to trafficking during these times. Now the perpetrator can comfortably recruit online children victims of trafficking, and there are plenty of websites available for these criminals to choose from. This is, of course, fueling the demand, which has an immediate consequence in the number of children falling victim for trafficking, especially for sexual exploitation. So once again, we see how the online world is very much linked to the real world, or in the real world. Let me set the record straight. Child trafficking is one of the gravest violations of children's fundamental rights, and one of the most severe forms of violence against children. Therefore, a zero tolerance policy is necessary when it comes to trafficking in general, but also especially children. And it can never be justified in any way, under any circumstances, but rather condemned in the strongest way. More strict rules need to be put in place to tackle this phenomenon online, and tech companies also needs to take their share of responsibility. More cross-border cooperation among law enforcement is needed in the transit and host countries is crucial to save children's lives and children trafficking. I think it's also, for me, very important to mention that marginalized children, especially unaccompanied children, undocumented, unregistered, or unaccounted for during the asylum process, are particularly vulnerable to victims of trafficking. Children are by far the most vulnerable individuals, and it is of paramount important to work out preventive measures. Trafficking in person is a lucrative business worth millions, so it is key to dismantle the entire business model. As such, trafficking in human beings is driven by considerable profits and complex interplay of supply and demand. The cornerstone of all EU actions remains to prevent the crime, and including by countering the culture of impunity that fosters it. Today's roundtable is an opportunity to learn more from you, awardees, whose organizations are working on the ground, and get a sense on what the things that need to be improved for a more effective fight against these heinous crimes. It is also a possibility for us to build up a closer cooperation to together pave the way and strengthen the common work to fight trafficking, especially concerning children. We will also hear about the recently adopted EU strategies on combating trafficking in human beings from Oliver Onidi, acting EU anti-trafficking coordinator, and more of the work done by the EU agencies. We will also highlight the need of a better cross-border cooperation with countries outside the European Union. It is a crime that doesn't see any border, therefore we also need to address the situation, these hideous crimes, with cross-border cooperation. Please always count on me and, of course, the Child Rights Intergroup in the European Parliament in our common struggle for a world where children can live a life free from violence in real life or online world. So thank you very much for all the work you are doing, and I'm very much looking forward to hear all about the important work that you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evan, for this powerful introduction. Thank you so much as well for your great leadership within the intergroup in these issues. We are very happy to have you on board and to have you as vice chair fighting this fight. Thank you so much for that. So as Evan has already anticipated, we will hear from many members of the European Parliament covering several geographical areas of the European Union. And having us already set the record straight and highlighted the fact that to win this fight, despite these crimes knows no border, and there's a very complex chain behind these crimes. So we will try to unpack the different challenges that are associated with these crimes in today's roundtable discussion. So without further ado, before then introducing specifically the panelists to this roundtable discussion, I will now leave the floor to Jacob, Secretary General of Child 10. Jacob, the floor is.
Thank you so much, Emilio, and thank you for your work and dedication to this issue and to children's rights in general. And also, of course, a big thank you to you as well, Evan, for this great and important introduction and putting the spotlight on the severity of the topic of today's discussion, and for your exceptional commitment to protect children from exploitation and trafficking, and hosting this conversation and arranging it together with us at Child 10 is a great honor for us. So my name is Jacob Flard, and I'm the Secretary General for Child 10. And I will also, before I start introducing the awarded members and our organization a little bit, we'll also like to really thank Mr. Milan Burgles from SND and also the Vice Chair of the Intergroup for attending us today, as well as Ms. Ramona Strugario from Renew Europe, and also Mr. Olivier Onidi, Ms. Anna Ekstedt, Mr. Jari Liuko, and Mr. Duko van Heel for giving us the opportunity to listen to you in the upcoming discussion. It's a great honor to be giving that opportunity for us. And also thank you for all of you who attend this seminar. There will be open for questions and answers in the chat after the different presentations. So feel free to use that during the presentations. So just a brief summary. Child 10 is an international organization based in Sweden and works to strengthen the role and capacity of grassroots organizations that works to combat child trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation of children. So every year we select 10 organizations that receives financial and organizational support to enhance their capacity, but also for working together for cross-national and cross-sectoral collaboration, as well as joint advocacy and joint awareness raising initiatives. We focus in particular in Europe, and this year we received more than 90 different nominated organizations and from 27 different countries around Europe. And from that we have done research and selection and selected the most prominent group representing different perspectives, different expertise from across Europe. So today I'm very grateful to be able to introduce these 10 exceptional organizations and listen to their experiences working on the ground with identification of children and protection and prevention. So the organizations that we will listen to today are based in Italy, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Romania, the Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Latvia, Norway, and Sweden. And the representatives of the organizations will speak after each other without any interruptions from my side. So I will hereby take the opportunity to start giving the floor to Irina Mazurika from Marta Center in Latvia. So please, Irina, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm the leader of Victim Support Department and a social worker. Marta Center is Latvia-based 20-years-old organization. We promote the protection and rights of women, young people, and children, and provide victim support services. In Latvia, so far, we have mostly internal cases of human trafficking of minors, but even though identification of minor victims is a challenge. We cooperate with state police, municipality, social services, and shelters. However, we are still lacking common attitude that child sex trafficking is not a free will. Cases of minors are investigated mostly under the prostitution article, which means that penalties for traffickers are lighter and children and their parents do not receive information about specific rehabilitation program. So even though they are collaborating with police, they are not recognized as victims of human trafficking and don't receive help. Unfortunately, we do not have common guidelines and referral mechanism in Latvia for all the stakeholders who are in contact with children at risk. In Marta, as outreach activities, we provide training for specialists about identification of victims, interactive seminars for children in foster care, and peer groups for youth about the risks of human trafficking. However, this work is project-based, but should be constant activities on a national level. Our experience shows that in Latvia, in the highest risk of sex trafficking are children who experience neglect and have previously suffered from sexual violence. We believe that the work should focus not only on children, but on the whole family as a systemic approach. And this can be done only by strong cooperation and regular communication between institutions. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Karina Angelina, and I founded Light Up Germany when I was 21. Light Up is an international youth movement based in Norway, Austria, and Germany. We shed a light on the reality of human trafficking to end the demand for forced labor and sexual exploitation, but also to prevent young people from being exploited. We believe that to fight commercial sexual exploitation of minors effectively, it is vital to include the voices and perspectives of young people. Therefore, Light Up provides a platform for youth to rise up for change. We empower them to raise awareness among their peers by starting, for example, local teams, events, and creative projects. Their involvement as experts of peer communication helps us to reach more young people effectively and ensures that the issue is being discussed openly and sustainable among the youth. Due to rapid digitalization of society and increasing recruitment and exploitation of children online, we believe all children are at risk of sexual commercial exploitation. A vast amount of abusive material is available on major porn sites today, but also on popular social media platforms. Children have easy access to both. The German Conference of Ministers for Gender Equality 2020 emphasized that the so-called loverboy scam in Germany is on the rise and that female minors are especially targeted via social networks with the goal to exploit them in prostitution. Amongst our workshops, participants maximum 2 in 10 minors have heard of the loverboy scam or online grooming before. Therefore, we need to educate children and youth about the risks of online and offline sexual exploitation in order to prevent it. It is vital to include youth and their perspective in policy development, strengthening the protection from sexual commercial exploitation of children and preventing the demand for it. We would like to see this addressed at the EU level by all member states, taking actions to include these topics in school curriculums, provide holistic online prevention campaigns, and allocating sufficient funds to cover the costs of training and implementation. Thank you.
Malaika, can we have you next, please?
Oh, thank you. My name is Malaika Ringo from the Netherlands. I'm the founder of Footprint to Freedom, a survivor-led organization based in the Netherlands and in East Africa. We support survivors to become survivor leaders, to join the front line in the fight against human trafficking, as well as engage in prevention, awareness raising, advocacy, and also we support survivors in their healing journey. But today I want to focus on a personal experience as a migrant survivor of human trafficking when it comes to victim identification. What I see during victim identification from my personal experience, the law enforcement and the service providers do not understand the role of cultural awareness when it comes to identifying victims, especially for sexual trafficking. A lot of service providers are not trauma-informed, are not victim-centered. And we survivors have to go through a lot of re-traumatization to retell the story over and over again for one to be believed, which causes post-traumatic stress, intimidation, and also causes survivors not to ask for help. Secondly, we need also a protection approach in the migration policies. As a minor child survivor of human trafficking, I see discrimination, inconsistency in support. There should be a child first and a migrant second, our second in everything. So we need long-term support, especially mental health support for survivors of human trafficking, because there's no quick fix for recovery. Invest in empowerment and programs for survivors to strive. And also we need to shift away from the idea of a perfect victim, because there's not such a thing like a perfect victim. Victims do not identify, but instead train frontline workers to kind of spot the signs and indicators to support human trafficking before it happens. Of recent, in Europe, a lot of migrant survivors, children are disappearing across Europe in refugee camps without a trace. In Netherlands alone, almost 25,000 children have been missing in the refugee camps in the last 10 years, but without a record or without knowing where they are. So we need to push in a protection approach when it comes to migrant children because they're at risk of human trafficking. And lastly, I want to emphasize on survivor inclusion. There's a big deficit when it comes to survivors being included in formation of policies and interventions. A lot of, presently we see there's a lot of mismatch with programs not matching the actual needs of the victims and survivors, because survivors are not included in the formation of these services. And also when it comes to policies, there's need to include a survivor narrative when making these policies, because their narrative is very important in coming up with strategies that can address prosecution, prevention, and protection of victims of survivors. In this way, we need to focus on not looking at survivors only as victims, but also as partners when it comes to the response and identification of human trafficking among children. Thank you.
Hello, I represent Norvahuset, an organization against sexual violence based in the south of Sweden. Norvahuset works with supportive outreach and preventative work. And we identify children via popular social media platform. But one of our biggest concerns and biggest problem in this identification is the algorithms that is working on social media platforms, which makes it quite hard to find children and to identify them being in harm. So at the moment, we work with children, learning children to identify other children that are at risks or being exploited online. And they can help us to tip, and we can then help the children that is being victims. We see that there is a big, we need more collaboration with police and schools, and the official sector, between the official sector and the NGOs. And we see that a lot of things is happening online, and a lot of sexual exploitation is based online. So we need programs to prevent this from happening and to identify victims. We can see that a lot of the perpetrators that is exploiting children online is actually children themselves, which makes it so very important to really find and help these children so they don't continue doing these sort of process. And we need to stop these kind of behaviors to make sure that no more children are being exploited online. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and please allow me to extend a sincere thank you to the organizers for bringing us together. My name is Loredana, and I work for Eliberare, a Romanian organization focused on preventing human trafficking and sexual exploitation, founded 8 years ago. Our goal is to equip people to prevent human trafficking in their own communities. For the past few years, we have informed more than 700,000 students in schools about fighting human trafficking with the help of 5,000 teachers and the curricula approved by the Ministry of Education. Through our capacity building programs, we train more than 3,000 key actors like social workers, police officers, teachers, priests, laborers, inspectors to recognize the indicator of exploitation and to detect and notify suspicions in everywhere. Our intervention model is recognized in the worded and the policy guide on justice developed by the Delta 87 and the United Nations University included our model for training non-formal actors as an example of good practice at local level. Last year, we advocated for the implementation of standard operating procedures to the child protective system in Romania, a mechanism providing a simpler and more clear procedure on reporting cases and notifying suspicions in residential centers for children. Nearly 50% of identified trafficking victims in Romania are under the age of 18. Traffickers subject children to trafficking while in the care of state and while being part of shelters or other type of facility care institutions. Many of these children are exploited abroad. There is a continuous need to train different stakeholders on detecting and notifying potential cases of human trafficking. We need early proactive identification and mechanisms for the implementation and reporting when the law is violated. We need to know how to protect the children from online sexual exploitation and abuse. And the last remark I want to make is the need for coordination. A real dialogue needs to take place, and we all need to recognize each other's strength, but also limitation. We need all actors to sit at the same table and co-create solutions for better identification of children victims of sexual exploitation. We need to harmonize local practices with national and international legislation, and we need everyone not only to have a seat at the table, but to have a voice in delivering efficient solutions. Thank you very much, and I look forward for the discussions today.
Entella, can we have you next, please?
I was muted. Hello, thank you for inviting us. I'm Entella Abdullahi and I represent Vatra Psychosocial Center, that is an Albanian non-profit organization that is working more than 20 years with anti-trafficking activities all over Albania, providing direct services to victims of human trafficking, activities on prevention, capacity building of state and non-state institutions for implementation of legislation and policies, advocacy and lobbying to ensure protection of victims' rights. Vatra is member of National Referral Mechanism and work based on standard operating procedures for protection of victims and based off National Action Plan. In order to outreach and identify children victims of human trafficking, Vatra works through direct outreach work of mobile units in 4 regions of Albania, working on identification within vulnerable groups. In Albania, over 60% of victims are identified by mobile units run by NGOs, approaching schools through trainings and peer education, information sessions, focus groups, etc. And another way is collaboration and mentoring of child protection unit and other state institutions and civil society for identifying and referring cases of victims of trafficking. Mostly of children victims are girls, and mostly of them are sexually exploited. Mostly children comes from families with social and economic problems, including families that have pronounced gender-based violence, or families that are internally displaced from remote areas to big cities, mostly during touristic season. Child protection system in Albania lacks of identification capacities and implementation of standard operating procedures, lack of human and financial capacities to develop programs for empower of vulnerable groups. There is a need also for building a stronger legislation framework to address better the internal trafficking of children in Albania. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abida Perlic, and I'm one of the founders of the association Novi Put that has been combating and preventing all forms of child trafficking in Bosnia and Herzegovina, identifying children potential and genuine victims thereof since 2010. We are currently the only NGO providing direct assistance to exploited children in the entire Herzegovina region, and we are the member of the National Referral Mechanism. Unfortunately, our country has never recovered from the recent war, and the polarized political climate marked by constant nationalist rhetoric, corruption, nepotism has resulted in an unstable environment and has created a fertile ground for traffickers, especially those recruiting children online. Our country has been primarily identified as country of origin of victims of human trafficking, and many of them are minor females. However, a number of unidentified child victims is significantly higher, and even though majority of those identified are Roma children, their actual number is significantly higher, as their exploitation is often justified as traditional cultural practices and customs by law enforcement and social workers, and hence often used as an excuse not to undertake any measures to identify and assist victims and prosecute perpetrators. In some cases, sexually exploited minors are even identified as prostitutes. Also, due to still prevailing stigma around sexual exploitation in general and very low awareness, A vast majority of cases of online grooming, sexual exploitation of children, and production of child sexual abuse materials are not reported at all. Due to insufficient efforts invested by the government, in 2020, Bosnia was downgraded to Tier 2 watch list of the US State Department Trafficking in Persons report for the third consecutive year. And we as an NGO working at the grassroots level strongly believe that in order to tackle the issue efficiently, it is still necessary to significantly increase awareness among children about the prevailing forms of child trafficking to prevent it from occurring in the first place, but also to provide training to relevant professionals on detection and identification of child victims, to strengthen multidisciplinary cooperation in the identification process and improve assistance to identified victims. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good afternoon. My name is Esohe Agachise. I'm the founder and director of Iroko Onlus. It's a charity that works prevalently in Italy, but also in Nigeria, which is a significant country of destination for victims of trafficking. Our services include free medical and legal services to victims of trafficking, cultural mediation, and accompaniment to services. We carry out a lot of advocacy and also preventative work, especially in Nigeria. For instance, we provide services to young girls who are at risk of being trafficked into Italy from Nigeria to ensure that this does not happen. And we carry out a lot of outreach. During our outreach work, we come into contact with a lot of minors. And because in Italy, we have a system where minors are given prioritized services by specialist government agencies like the Office for Minors, we then refer their cases to these specialized offices because we work in a network of other organizations that are specialized in various aspects of service provision to victims of trafficking. Now, there are a couple of issues that are of concern to us with regards to the support that is given to children. And one of them is the question of prompt and timely identification of minors who are victims of trafficking, because a prompt identification of them as minors ensures that they are able to have access to that prioritized kind of services that is provided by the state. The second issue is that of when they reach the age of 18, you sometimes find that services to them is interrupted when they reach 18. So if yesterday a 17-and-a-half-year-old child was receiving that prioritized support, the next day when this person is considered an adult, having reached 18 years, those services are sometimes interrupted. So what we want to suggest is that there should be a continued support to such children who come into that kind of prioritized support until they are completely independent, and that such support should not be dependent on their attainment of adulthood, because then when we say they are 18 and are adults, that does not necessarily mean that they have the kind of support that they would need to be independent. This is because what we notice is that very often when they are left on their own at the attainment of 18, they are also at risk of being re-trafficked. And we've had several cases of that happening, of children who were in specialized services being left on their own and then being re-trafficked again. So these are some of the ideas that we would like to be prioritized in providing services to victims of trafficking. And we also suggest that there is a reintroduction, more work, more collaboration between countries of destination in the West and countries of origin, like in Nigeria, because, for instance, our work takes us between the two countries to ensure that there's more preventative action, there is more attention to the causes, the root causes of trafficking, especially of minors from countries like Nigeria into Europe, and so that this can be addressed at the roots and you don't find children being trafficked living before their problems are addressed. A few days ago, we had the notice of more than 1,000, now that the roads are opening again, 1,000 people arriving into Lampedusa again from northern Africa. So we find that COVID has only delayed a little bit, but it has not resolved the issues. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marija Anđelković. I'm the director and one of the founders of the NGO Astra, Anti-Trafficking Action from Serbia. Astra is working on combating trafficking in human beings and children for more than 20 years now through direct assistance to victims, but also through prevention, education, and monitoring. In 20 years, we supported more than 540 victims of trafficking, out of which almost 50% were children. Most of them were girls sexually exploited and forcibly married, but also boys for forced begging and forced criminality. Speaking of identification of children victims of trafficking, which is our today's topic, apart from all the challenges already mentioned previously by my colleagues, I would like to draw your attention to one positive practice, believe it or not, that we have on identification in Serbia, and that is that identification and assistance to victims in Serbia is based in the social welfare system and not depending on police investigation and judicial procedures. In practice, it means that each child potential victim should receive all necessary assistance without any conditions by law enforcement. On the other hand, we are very worried with the lack of proactive identification of child victims by different institutions. We cannot put the burden of self-identification to a child, but institutions need to proactively discover and investigate this serious criminal act, very often organized crime act. The recent case from April this year on allegations that the city mayor of Serbian city of Jagodina, who is on power for the last 17 years, that he was trafficked and pimping girls age 14 for the last 10 years, upset the whole public in Serbia. We were even more disturbed when the identity of the witnesses were discovered in the media and the prosecution was still silent. Only after the public pressure, prosecution decided to transfer jurisdiction to another town prosecution, since it was obvious that the prosecution in Jagodina could not be independent in investigation. We still hope that the new prosecutor will be strong enough to bring this case to the court. We also hope that in the EU accession process, Serbia will take into account a new EU anti-trafficking strategy. And I would also like to ask you for your support in asking our governments together with us that institutions need to develop and implement clear and effective indicators, because we cannot sit in our offices and wait for children to come and identify themselves. But also we would like to see police and prosecution to use proactive investigation and knowledge they gain on numerous trainings organized in the last 2 decades now, supported also by the European Commission. Then we would like to see fully protection of children, witnesses, and victims before, during, and after the court procedure and trials. We would like to see prevention of re-traumatization of children. I will just remind you that children in Serbia need to repeat their traumatic experience at least 7 times from the moment of identification until the end of the court procedure. We would like to insist that Serbia start to provide assistance to child victims, since the majority of the assistance are still provided by CSOs. Thanks to the donations, not from the budget. And we would like to see Serbian government to be more invest in reintegration of victims, since the good reintegration and tackling root causes are the best prevention of trafficking. And last but not the least, the only way to have every child informed about trafficking and problems about trafficking and dangerous is to have official school curriculum in Serbian education system. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. My name is Sandra Kanakaris, and I'm the Secretary General at Ellen Centret, and Ellen Centret is part of the non-profit foundation 1000 Opportunities. And the perks with being last one out is that everyone has said very important things, and especially thanks to Novahuset and Light Up, who pointed out the pornography's impact and the algorithm on the social media. So I will skip this part, and also to Iroko Onlos, who pointed out a common problem that we see, the problem with the continuous support to children turning 18. We are based in Stockholm, Sweden, and for more than 10 years, we have been working with young people subjected to trafficking and other forms of sexual exploitation. And our target group is young people up to the age of 25, and the absolute majority are girls and young women. And Ellen Center provide help, advice, and therapy through our national chat helpline and in our help and trauma center in Stockholm. And we also offer legal advice through collaboration with our lawyers and educate professionals. The target group finds us partly through our information ads on social media and partly through close collaboration with the authorities that, for example, can offer support but not treatment, and therefore direct the children and young people to our center where they can get the treatment that they need. The chat helpline also works as a low threshold support that encourages the young people to get in touch. All of our work is based on our experience helping and supporting young people and on the experiences they have shared with us. Last year, we, together with Child 10 and the survivor organization Not Your Whore, released the report, No One Heard the Cry for Help. It is extremely obvious in this report how the child rights perspective is constantly lacking when children are seeking help. They are rarely viewed as children with their own rights, and I think this is key in some of these difficulties that we see in this area. We also think that we forget about the teenagers. We see the women and we have started to see the children, but our experience is that when we talk about children, there is a tendency to focus on the very, very young children. And this is an obstacle when it comes to identifying young teenager victims. Our images and prejudice about what and how a victim of trafficking or sexual exploitation looks like is a problem. And in order to enhance the identification process of child victims, we see that it is crucial as a first step that the authorities and schools have knowledge about that sexual exploitation is something that many children can be victims of, and that it is unfortunately not rare that teenagers are sexually exploited both online and offline, and that this is a form of violence that we need to understand, prevent, and ask about in order to identify. We think that one of many important solutions is that it is absolutely necessary to ask routinely based questions about all forms of violence and exploitations to all children and young people that are in schools and that visits health and care providers. And we also think it is very important to educate young people on these issues and that has to happen continuously. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You were the last one, Sandra, is that right? Thank you so much. A big thank to each and every one of you. I had to say for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your expertise. And as I said at the beginning, also to do the work on the ground. I must admit that we particularly cherish these kind of moments where, where you guys force us to do some reality checks. So thank you so much for that. I really very much appreciate that. I've been taking a lot of notes. I'm not sure even that I'm going to be able to go through all of them, but let me assure you, of course, that I will take this into consideration, and of course I will share in the years to come and cherish this moment. So I actually have to say that it's very interesting to hear from all of you, which is also a pretty diverse. There's been a lot of geography diversity, but at the same time, many of you have highlighted common and mutual challenges. So when it comes to identifying victims, I would say almost all of you agreed on the importance, of course, to continue support to victims, of course, and particularly, Sohe, you mentioned the fact that turning 18 is not just a magic number. So, and it's actually very much important as well to support child victim of trafficking, even when they actually become adults. And because the 18 is not just a magic number or an easy fix for this. So thank you so much as well for that. So now I will actually open the floor for the proper discussion with policymakers and legislators. And I will first give the floor to Evin Inchir, our co-host, and then I will go forward with the list. Please, the floor is.
Thank you very much, Emilio, and thank you once again to all the awardees and the organizations who are here with us today and have been presenting the very much important work that you are doing. And as Emilio said, I mean, the work that you are doing is really also pushing us lawmakers to take our share of responsibility. Sometimes I feel that we are always one step behind, and because of different reasons, but this really makes more legislators to understand the importance. And I just wanted to also add that this afternoon we will be having in the Committee of Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs be discussing combating trafficking, or the EU strategy on combating trafficking in human beings for 2021 to 2025. So I will take all the inputs and all the experiences and the recommendations that you have been sharing with us today with me. So once again, thank you. And I also wanted to present my colleagues that are with us today. A big welcome to my colleague, member of the European Parliament, Milan Bergles from Slovenia, from the S&D Group, Vice Chair of the Intergroup on the Children's Rights. Also Ramona Strugario from Romania, Renew, belonging to the Renew Group, a member of the European Parliament. Mr. Oliver Onidi, Acting EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator from the European Commission. Ms. Anna Ekstedt, Swedish Ambassador at Large for Combating Trafficking in Persons on behalf of the OSCE. Mr. Jari Liuku, Head of the Serious Organized Crime Center, the Europol, and Mr. Duco Van Hel, Anti-Trafficking Coordinator, Frontex. This shows the wide range of work that also we are doing from the side of the EU and the other organizations. Once again, thank you from my side, and I would like to give the floor over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Evin. So now we can open the roundtable discussion. Milan Bergles, Vice Chair of the Intergroup on Children's Rights. Milan, the floor is yours.
Dear Emilio, thank you for the floor. Dear colleagues, dear partners and friends of the Intergroup, allow me to begin by underlining the importance of this roundtable, which aims at improving our understanding of the extent and the patterns of child trafficking in Europe, as well as the existing mechanisms for prevention, identification, and provision of adequate assistance to child victims of human trafficking and their potential shortcomings. In this short intervention, I will focus on the state of play in my country of election, and related to that, touch upon the region of Southeastern Europe. The annual reports of the Slovenian Interdepartmental Working Group on Combating the Trafficking in Human Beings, which was established in 2001 and which supports the work of National Anti-Trafficking Coordinator, namely reveal low numbers of detected cases of human trafficking. The data provided by authorities is disaggregated by gender and the country of origin of both victims and perpetrators, and with regard to the exploitative purpose. While the prevailing number of detected human trafficking cases is connected with sexual exploitation, the data collection is not tailored to include the age of the trafficking victims and therefore does not reveal the share of minors among them. What is more, the available data suggests that to this date, there has been no case of criminal prosecution based on paragraph 2 of Article 175 of the Criminal Code, which specifies the criminal acts related to exploitation of minors for prostitution. The lack of focus on identification of children as victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation unfortunately reflects also in the absence of the mechanism for state assistance to trafficking minors. In contrast to low number of cases of children trafficking in the official statistics, non-governmental organizations observe worrying trends of increased human trafficking and exploitation of its victims, including children. According to the Slovenian NGOs, these phenomena are significantly present among three vulnerable groups of children. First, children lured into prostitution through fake promises of relationships and emotional abuse, so-called lover boy phenomenon. Second, children with drug abuse problems. And third, unaccompanied minors. NGOs point to another underreported phenomenon of the abuse and still a very sensitive issue to rise in light of the persisting stereotypes and discrimination, early and forced marriages in the Roma community. These trends indicate that Slovenia is a destination country of human trafficking, but also a country of origin and transit. The latter calls on us to look at the broader regional context. Southeastern Europe, a notorious route exploited by transnational organized crime, including trafficking in human beings, due to its socio-economic situation and weakness in law enforcement, is since autumn 2015 also known as one of the routes for human trafficking connected to irregular migration. Somewhat paradoxically, the later report of the Interdepartmental Working Group attributes dramatic decrease to only 13 detected criminal cases of human trafficking in Slovenia in 2019 to the focus of authorities on preventing of irregular migration. There is clearly a room for improvement in state mechanisms and the approach of institutions involved in combating human trafficking. Parallel to closing these gaps, I believe, then an absolute priority should be given to increasing the sensitivity of officials and representatives of state services that are in contact with vulnerable groups of children and empowering them to identify their children victims of trafficking and the danger of sexual exploitation of minors in general. Due to the pandemic, many Roma families in the Western Balkan countries have lost their source of income in the lockdown, working previously and registered as wagers, restaurant musicians, and collectors of recycling materials. The NGOs observe that in this time, the number of arranged marriages between young girls from Serbia and men from European Union, for mainly also belonging to Roma minority, has increased significantly, providing the burdened families with necessary means for living. The question is, what can be done to protect children in such cases, where the family is involved in the trafficking and the child comes from the third country where the state might not guarantee adequate support? I will end with this remark, as I'm eager to listen to the experience from other regions and of the organizations working on the ground. I remain convinced that such exchange of information is the first step in discovering possible avenues for the improvement of victims' identification of trafficking and children for sexual exploitation and better prevention of these atrocious criminal activities across Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Member Milan Bergles, for your testimony. Thank you so much as well for providing such an articulate and detailed snapshot of the situation in the West Balkan region and all of the southeastern region of Europe. Thank you as well for highlighting the fact that the current pandemic has even further exacerbated the situation in this region, well, all over the world, this region particularly, and has increased as well the vulnerability of these groups. So now I will give the floor to Ramona Strugariu from Romania and belonging to the Renew Europe group. Ramona, please, the floor is yours. Ramona, we cannot hear you, or maybe I cannot. Can you guys hear Ramona? There seems to be a problem with the audio. We still can't hear you. No. Still no audio. Okay. So maybe then I'll actually go, we can actually move on until Ramona Strugariu is trying to reconnect. And so I will actually, it is my pleasure now to give the floor to Mr. Olivier Onidi, who is an EU anti-trafficking coordinator for the European Commission. Also will be presenting today the EU strategy on combating trafficking in human beings for 2021-2025, has already been mentioned by MEP Evin Incher. Olivier, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I'll be brief, so Ramona can come in and have even more space for her intervention. Now, I would like to thank your intergroup for this event. I'd like really to focus on some of the things we've heard from the various projects that have been presented to us, and thank you, Jacob, for making this available to us. The different perspectives of many of you on the ground who are
Sorry,
working.
Olivier, sorry
Yes.
to interrupt. Can we see if Ramona, I think maybe she has, Ramona, can you try and see if we can hear you? Maps to Gario, are you still there? Can we try? Okay, sorry, then we just continue. Sorry, Olivier. Please, go ahead.
Okay, so we'll just continue and taking some of the aspects that I've heard from the presentation of the different initiatives, I'll relate that to the new strategy. So you've said it, Ms. Insir also has said it. The commissioner will be later on in the Libe committee presenting this strategy. I think a lot in the strategy is about cooperation. New cooperation means with the civil society, with lawmakers, with the different authorities, but amongst authorities as well. Many of you have highlighted the fact that it's not only the law enforcement or the judicial, but it goes much beyond. We have like education, social ministries, labor, all have a role to play, migration, in order to better integrate this dimension of human beings and being trafficked, being abused, and using their own prerogatives, their own instruments in order to fight this phenomenon. So that's the first, I think, very important aspect. The second is, and again, at least three of you have just said it, there's still many loopholes in our legal framework in order to just pursue criminally those who actually traffic in the individuals. But, and we see a lot of grounds here based on the experience, positive experience made by many member states, also criminalizing not only those who traffic human beings, but also criminalize the simple, use of services being provided by individuals subject to trafficking. That would be a major step forward to have, like at EU level, some form of harmonization of that sort of criminalization. And in doing so, of course, have a way better way to disincentivize the provision of services of individuals subject to trafficking. Another aspect, at least three of you as well, have raised this problem, this phenomenon of impunity. It is true. We still see not enough prosecution of cases, not enough actual judgments. Also, it relates to the means that are being put at the disposal of the law enforcement and judiciary in order to do so. So a lot is to continue emphasizing how important this is to prioritize this sort of crime. And Jari later on will tell you how, with the help of Europol, we're projecting this crime as like a really high priority crime to actually be followed in the European Union. Another aspect all of you have referred to is the dramatic increase of online abuse. Online abuse from the stage of recruitment to the stage of provision, actually, of services. A lot here has recently been done with the help of the European Parliament, the Council, so the lawmakers at the EU level, finding new ways to provide further strength to companies to detect child sexual abuse material on the internet, for example, also mandating for companies to actually do more, providing also legal certainty, because there should be no conflicts between our role of protecting the privacy of individuals using the internet, but there needs to be also a way to actually screen, monitor what is being done on all these social networks, etc., in order to detect when illicit material is being used or illicit services are being provided. So very important aspect here. And in developing new tools, this also means new technological tools to be used in order to actually see or conduct investigations, like the major one Europol was involved in with many member states last week, which managed, to crack on the probably largest server providing child sexual abuse material on the darknet. So that's another example of what we can do together. On the protection side, here, all of you have emphasized the fact that the way we see protection is slightly too limited. I mean, protection must be much broader in terms of the length of time we actually provide protection to an individual. And that relates also to some of the still existing deficiencies in terms of allowing individuals to stay in the European Union, allowing also better ways to detect the age of individuals in order to be even more protective for those particularly vulnerable, notably minors, and integrate that in the various relevant policy areas, migration, but also, for example, border management, where we have reviewed our way of getting biometric material recently. We've decreased the threshold from 12 years old to 6 years old to have quality pictures, but also quality fingerprints in order to be better equipped to detect actually children being potentially trafficked by criminals. Finally, also, all of you have highlighted the importance to develop new partnerships. Most of the individuals being trafficked in the EU are European citizens, but of course, there's a lot also of trafficking being orchestrated around us. We've heard, the situation in Serbia, in Nigeria. These are very good examples of cases where we need to do even more with countries around us in order first to help them to reinforce their way to fight the phenomenon of trafficking, but also having our different authorities and services and also civil society organizations cooperate much more. And most of the schemes that we provide at EU level to finance organizations to build up additional capacity in third countries, partner countries around us, focuses on helping civil society organizations to develop their tools. So a few examples of what you will find in the strategy, and to tell you again how relevant the different testimonies we just got are for us in order to continue trying to improve the response we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier Onidi, EU acting EU anti-trafficking coordinator. As we all seen, the EU is paying a lot of importance to this topic. Much has been done. There is an entire work stream dedicated on trafficking and anti-trafficking, especially as well on protecting children. Thank you so much as well for mentioning, some of the positive examples as well, and the importance of criminalizing users, because of course it's important as well to tackle the demand, so that we can actually avoid the harm from happening in the first place. Thank you so much as well for walking us through the important development, legislative development also on countering child trafficking, but also child sexual abuse and child sexual exploitation. It's actually also, for me, it was also very important that you also highlighted the fact that unfortunately the strong majority of the children victims of trafficking in the European Union are actually EU children. That doesn't mean that, of course, the children are important to kind of to demystify certain of the myths that always portray children coming from outside of the European Union as the victim, when we also have these problems within our own countries. So thank you so much for that. Before moving on, I would like to try and see if Mep Strugario has managed to connect again.
I did.
Maybe solve.
I did. Can you hear me now?
Wonderful.
Yes. Thank you very much. Sorry for this adventure. I really don't know what happened, but I was able to connect now via my phone. I think it was just an upgrade from attendee to panelist. Very happy to be here today in this event and in this company, I must say. And I would first like to thank all of the organizations involved in this process for their incredible work. Because it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of resources which are usually not available, and I would address a bit later this issue as well. It is also a highly emotionally draining topic. And I'm happy to also see it as a priority finally, and an important one among our discussions, decision-making at European level and debate, because we had to put it on the table. And in many of these countries, the ones we heard about today, but others as well, there's a problem with reporting, there's a problem with law enforcement, there is a problem with coordination, as rightfully pointed out by my colleague from Romania, Loredana, that I would like to also greet, and I'm happy that their work is acknowledged and that they are part of this discussion. All of my best thoughts to Olivier Onidi as well. I know, and we've been working together for a number of years. I know he is committed, and the European Commission is committed to this. I'm very, very happy that we will have the LIBE discussion about trafficking this afternoon. It does exist. Finally, we provide the importance to the topic that maybe it deserves. Now, with the figures and the state of play, there are a lot of information that we received already. Perhaps it is also worth mentioning that, yes, nearly 3/4 of the victims of child trafficking are European citizens, that the vast majority, which is 78% of child victims in the EU 27 are girls. And that perhaps gives us some indication on where to focus with the actions that we are going to take. And the girls also represent almost 3/4 of child victims with non-EU citizenship, which is about 69%. If we also look at the Europol report in April 2020 on basically how COVID-19 will shape the serious organized crime landscape, we will realize that basically if the pandemic is followed by a recession, which is highly probable, then there may be an increased demand for labor and for sexual exploitation, and of course a potential increase in intra-EU trafficking of the victims. Now on the solutions, on what we can do about it, this is something that I would like to focus on. The cross-border cooperation, and I think Olivier, as much as I could hear, mentioned it. It does have results. We need to enforce that, and we have seen, for example, that those joint investigation teams had tangible results in countering human trafficking and child trafficking. This needs to continue, and it needs further support in order that the exchange of information, the way these teams work together, the special requests and the work of the agencies, together with the work of the law enforcement from the member states, is supported by all possible means.
Then on this dimension of awareness and prevention, and now I am moving to the member states as active part of countering and combating human trafficking. We know that in the EU anti-trafficking directive, we do have in Article 18 very clear obligations for the member states on appropriate measures in the field of prevention, information, awareness raising campaigns, education programs, regular training for all kinds of officials involved in countering trafficking, including frontline police officers and so on. There should also be an obligation, and here I think we should use all possible channels that we have from the member states to properly take into account the work of those organizations that are, and you are the living proof of that, working with these situations and these cases for years. This needs to be taken seriously. And member states should take you as active partners in countering this phenomenon, whether we talk about public-private partnerships between the state and various actors of the state and this kind of organizations, whether we talk about educational programs, and you heard mentioned by some of these organizations how they are involved in this kind of educational programs, whether we simply speak about the psychological assistance and shelter to the victims and working with traces which are very deep in some of the communities of these member states. Let us not forget that some of these children are trafficked by their own families, by their own parents. Let us not forget that sometimes the public actors are part of the process of trafficking and they are involved in it, whether we are talking about, sadly, some child protection authorities or even law enforcement authorities that are involved in the stories. And some of them are in this situation, and some of them simply do not know what to do and how to do it and how to act. I personally, I organized a campaign, an awareness campaign for victims of human trafficking, well, for potential victims of human trafficking, and passing on the message to those social media channels and in those environments where the potential victims could be. I must tell you that it was the most incredible exercise to do in Romania because there is no or not enough acknowledgement of the fact that politicians and public actors, even persons, influencers, persons with a lot of visibility need to actively get involved in this type of awareness campaigns and do things like, I don't know, describing maybe through a series of videos, which I did, and recordings, testimonials of the victims and typical behavior, if we talk about the lover boy method of recruitment of such traffickers, so that we could go with this message deep in the communities and make people aware of the danger that they are exposed to, if we're talking about young people and children, or for the parents that they are exposing their children to. Then in Bucharest, and I think my understanding is that there's only the only one basically in Romania at this point, there's one shelter, one organization, the Open Doors Foundation, and they're part of Eliberare platform, part of the work that Loredana mentioned. Only them are the ones assisting victims of trafficking, emergency assistance, providing a shelter for mothers and children, for example, but also working with other victims in the country. There's a handful of psychologists specialized in trauma, this kind of trauma, and working actually literally with the victims so that they are reintegrated and they are active part of the society afterwards, which is a very complicated thing to do, but it happens. It does give results. I have seen it, and I have seen successful stories in my country due to the work that some of you are doing and are performing. Then, of course, a whole strategy on victims' rights that needs to be enforced at national level as well, promoted, regulated from the side of the union, and also enforced and implemented at the level of the member states. And here a lot of our countries still have significant steps to take. Then let us not forget that a proper and efficient countering of human trafficking also depends on independent and efficient judicial systems in those member states, and also properly equipped social services, because this coordination of different actors needs to actually happen. Civil society, social services, law enforcement, all of them and all of us should actively contribute to counter trafficking. Now, there's a lot of work to do, obviously, but I am confident that we will succeed if we are able to create real partnerships in this field. Thank you again. Congratulations to the organizations having the courage to deal with this topic. I truly hope that me and my colleagues will continue this work with the help and support of the Commission, of course. And I'm looking forward to a very, very strong campaign in and with the member states as well, so that we could have the results that we are hoping for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Member Ramona Strugariu from Romania. Thank you so much as well. I particularly appreciated the solution-oriented approach that you took in your intervention. Thank you so much as well for your firm commitment and for your tremendous work that you've done in raising awareness about this dire situation, and to also acknowledge the fact that, it's very important to always put forward a victim-centered approach when we talk about these crimes, and to try and give them a platform for that. Thank you so much for that. So now we will move on and to the next speakers in the line, which is Miss Anna Eksted, Swedish Ambassador for Combatting Trafficking and Perpetrators.
Thank you very much. I would also like to start by thanking the Intergroup and also Child 10 for arranging this important and timely event. And thank you to all the awardees and the speakers. Listening to your testimonies, it's clear that we're not doing enough to prevent trafficking of children. Sweden sees a clear link between prostitution and trafficking in human beings for sexual exploitation, and pays a strong focus on addressing the demand. And since 1999, it's been illegal in Sweden to buy sexual services, which has proven to be a tool to counteract trafficking in human beings. And the work against trafficking in human beings is also an integral part of the Swedish feminist foreign policy. And within this foreign policy, we have developed strong cooperation with France, given the fact that we have similar legislation and also goals in this field. And Sweden has also, for the fourth time now, appointed a special envoy against trafficking in human beings. And the purpose of this function is to ensure that the issue remains high on the agenda, and to increase international cooperation in this field. The focus of the function is trafficking for all forms of exploitation, but with a special emphasis on trafficking for sexual exploitation. And it's also within the scope of the function to specifically focus on the vulnerabilities of children for all forms of trafficking in human beings. And although we still sort of lack solid data, it's clear from the testimonies that the COVID-19 situation has severe implications on sexual exploitation of children and trafficking in human beings. This was also recently discussed within the network of all the female foreign ministers that discussed this issue 2 weeks ago. And it's clear that the lockdowns and the closed schools due to the pandemic have made children more vulnerable for violence and also sexual exploitation and trafficking. We see that traffickers have changed their modus in order to recruit and exploit vulnerable groups and in these growing risk groups. In order to stop this, it's clear that we need solid cooperation models. A high number of projects and initiatives are now being implemented in order to make sure how we sort of best use information technology to prevent trafficking than rather having social media as a means for recruitment of victims. It's important that we are able to take stock of all this knowledge gained and ensure that this can lead to large-scale changes in this field beyond projects. And addressing the demand, as mentioned, is key in prevention. And Sweden has the current presidency of the OSCE, where increased democracy, human rights, and gender equality are in focus. And these are all areas that we all know that are very much linked to the work against trafficking. And we are very much looking forward to the upcoming OSCE Alliance in June that will address specifically trafficking, the demand for trafficking for sexual exploitation. Sweden has also worked together with Awardee in order to support the launch of the International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council. And as we also heard from previous speakers, it's very important that we do take the voices of survivors seriously and involve them in all the preventive work against trafficking. Of course, the EU strategy is very much welcome in order due to the fact that we're also reminding all the member states that they, independent of the national laws, all have an obligation to address the demand that fosters all forms of trafficking. Prevention is also about changing norms and attitudes. And just to mention that in Sweden in 2018, a new sexual offences legislation based on consent was introduced in Sweden. It's now an offence to perform a sexual act with someone who is not participating voluntarily. This is a very important step towards preventing abuse and also ensuring bodily integrity. It means, among other things, that anyone who buys sex from someone who has been trafficked and therefore does not participate voluntarily can be convicted of rape or negligent rape. And providing a comprehensive sexuality education is a significant part in reducing violence against children and also gender-based violence. And the Swedish government has now decided to update the curricula of schools in Sweden in order to discuss more gender equality, sexuality, and human rights, and understanding that sex must be based on consent and free will. We also need to make sure that child protection systems are in place, and the Swedish government has decided to start an inquiry for a proposal on a strategy to prevent all forms of violence against children, also including sexual exploitation and trafficking. But it's clear that we all need to do more, and countries of destination do have a responsibility to identify and protect child victims of trafficking. The mechanism also needs to be there in order to address when the exploitation has taken place online and maybe not in the destination countries, but actually in the country of origin, but with the involvement of actors in our countries. A lot has been done in terms of legislation, capacity building, cooperation models, and allocation of resources, as we heard from previous speakers. We need to disrupt the business model based on exploitation of children and follow the money of this crime. Further, we need to find the flaws and loopholes and also make sure that we properly can address the obstacles for successful prevention, identification, and the ultimate protection of children from this crime. We can all learn from the effects of the pandemic and how to sort of do better and build back stronger when the pandemic is over. And we still don't know how long we will sort of have to live with the negative implications of COVID-19, but it's clear that we need to sort of address these. We now have a chance also before societies are opening up and to address these issues jointly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anna Hedstedt, Swedish Ambassador at Large for Combating Trafficking Persons. Thank you so much as well for showing the Swedish commitment, also in, as you said, in appointing another special envoy yourself for combating trafficking in persons. Thank you as well for, for mentioning the fact that in order to enhance prevention, we need also to tackle and to counter social norms that change attitudes towards this crime. And thank you so much as well. I want to quote what you said, to follow the money and to dismantle the business model that benefits from the vulnerabilities. There is an entire network of of organized crime that is benefiting enormously at the expenses of children, which this gives me the perfect transition then for our next speaker, Mr. Jari Liukko, who is the head of the Serious Organized Crime Center at Europol. Please, Jari, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Dear partners, Europol's task is to support member states in the investigation of cross-border organized crime, including also human trafficking and child sexual exploitation. And I will focus on the topic from that perspective. Dear partners, what is human trafficking as a crime? human trafficking is certainly part of organized crime. And if we look at the current organized crime situation in the EU, we can conclude that organized crime in the EU is increasing and poses a high and diverse risk for member state security. However, corona pandemic had an impact on crime, and that is concerning also human trafficking. If we look at the information flow on human trafficking towards Europol, it has decreased 47% in 2020 compared to 2019, and 27% during the first quarter of this year compared to last year, same time period. In spite of this, we can say that still human trafficking remains among the most common criminal activities of the organized crime groups in the EU. Dear colleagues, what are the key features of human trafficking in the EU based on the investigation supported by Europol? Firstly, we must underline that that TFP remains clearly one of the most underreported crime types in the EU. However, if we look at the human trafficking investigation supported by Europol, sexual exploitation represents 41% of them. Forced criminality, 90%, labor exploitation, 10%, and the remaining different other types of exploitation types. Dear partners, what are the main findings if we look at the investigation supported by Europol and involving underage victims? Firstly, we must underline that only 5% of the TSPs in the investigation reported to Europol are including actually underage victims. Europol has received only 30 such contributions from the member states during the first quarter of 2021. Therefore, it is clear that this type of crime is certainly underreported. If we look at the various TSP types reported to Europol and involving the undermined victims, we can conclude that sexual exploitation represents 44% of the investigations, unknown exploitation types 17%, forced criminality 13%, labor exploitation 13%, forced becking 10%, and the remaining 3% concerning some marriages. Dear partners, what can we say about the victims of the human trafficking? In 2020, the number of victims in the investigation supported by Europol was approximately 5,000. In general, 59% of the victims are female and 39% are male, and 70% of the victims are from EU countries. As for the minors, as TSP victims during 2019 and 21, and they have represented approximately 4 to 5% of the identified victims in the EU. Although it is estimated that globally they represent 1/3 of the victims. In the EU, non-EU citizens represent 50% of all underage victims. Dear partners, what can be said about the suspects and organized crime groups involved in the human trafficking in the EU? In 2020, there were altogether 5,900 suspects in the investigation supported by Europol. 60% of them were EU nationals. When it comes to the organized crime groups involved in the human trafficking, we can see that the following key features remain. They are mainly EU-based polycriminal organized crime groups, meaning that they are dealing also with different other types of criminal activities, which are also profit-seeking syndicates that have increased their online activities, and their operations are more hidden than earlier at the moment. With regards to the organized crime groups involved in trafficking of minors, the general features of course apply, but there are also some specific elements which should be noticed when investigating this type of criminal activities. Children are trafficked from around the globe into EU, and underage victims are mainly trafficked for sexual exploitation and also forced becking and criminality. The most harmful EU organized crime networks involved in trafficking of minors are large family clans, which are focusing on minors who are mainly sharing the same nationality or ethnic background as the traffickers. Europol receives regularly notifications of children being sold to criminal networks by their families. And finally, online criminal activities are increasing and children are advertised as adults for sexual exploitation. Dear partners, what are in the EU the challenges in respect of human trafficking and law enforcement activities? Well, they include, firstly, the increased hidden and online criminality. Identification of victims remains still a challenge. Underreporting of the human trafficking and also child trafficking, and in particular, is a challenge. Unaccompanied minors and identification of high-value targets is a challenge. High-value targets are individuals and organized crime which are posing the highest security risk for the member states, and we should focus the investigations on these organizations and individuals. And if we look at the possible way forward to enhance the investigation and law enforcement activities on human trafficking, so firstly, we have to ensure the implementation of EU human trafficking strategy. And secondly, the prevention and reporting of human trafficking and identification of victims should be prioritized. And thirdly, human trafficking is cross-border organized crime, and therefore international cooperation and implementation of the EU policy cycle on organized crime, which is including also human trafficking and child sexual exploitation, should be enhanced with the support of Europol. And finally, the focus of the investigations should be on high-risk organized crime groups involved in human trafficking. Thank you very much for your attention, and I consider this as a really important event for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jari. Thank you so much as well for sharing those important and unfortunately very. Thank you so much for that. So now we will move on to our last speaker, who is Mr. Duco Van Heel. As has been said as well by Mr. Onidi, we need the better border management, also to better equip people who are working on the borders to identify victims. So please, now, Duco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilio. Can you hear me? Thanks. I'd like to also thank the intergroup and Child 10 for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to be together, especially with all the NGOs, because it's really good that border guards, law enforcement sit together with NGOs and discuss our problems. I would like to start with the work of Frontex related to children and trafficking in human beings. We focus quite a lot in our support to the member state on training of border guards, train-the-trainer programs. We have a child protection trainer for training for border guards. And we also have THB training for border guards, where we train the trainers of the member states to multiply within their member states. In this THB training, we have separate modules on children. So we could even give the whole training only related to children, awareness raising, identification, and speaking, interacting with victims or survivors. We also have handbooks for border guards with good practices on land, sea and air borders, how to deal with children, how to identify them, how to interact with them, how to refer them. These are 3 separate versions, so one for the land border, one for the sea border, and one for the air borders. We also have a handbook on risk profiles with specific information for first and second line border guards. And we have special profiles on nationalities, on type of trafficking. Sexual exploitation is one of the types where we have risk profiles on, but also one on children, specifically on children, how to identify them in first line and how to maybe identify them further in second line. Frontex is also collecting statistics of the member states related to children as people already said, this was a little bit of a problem. We were only collecting nationalities, and we didn't really have a broader overview of how many children were arriving, and also not about the sex of the person, male, female. So since 2018, Frontex is collecting this kind of information, and we use it in our reports, our public reports. So we are sharing this with everybody in general, to have also a better picture where things happens at the border, where are children arriving, where are unaccompanied children arriving, things like that. What is their sex? Are they male? Are they female? So that we can also better target together with the member states where we should be, where should we deploy our experts. We have now a new Frontex standing corps. So before we were always redeploying border guards from one place to another, but now we also have our own standing corps that is like operational at the border. They receive a basic training on child protection and on trafficking in human beings, and some of them will be further educated to a child specialist or a cross-border crime detection officer. So also here where THB is kind of a part in. So also here we see that like we try to create this certain expertise so that we can support the member states better in their work. The Fundamental Rights Office, where I am based within Frontex, we are working on a child-friendly complaints procedure. So also that it's much easier for children to file a complaint if they think that their fundamental rights are violated at the border. And also together with the authorities of Greece and Italy, and mainly under the supervision of the EU anti-trafficking coordinator's office, we helped Italy and Greece to develop SOPs, standard operational procedures, for the identification and mainly for the referral of victims of trafficking at the border in the hotspots, so that people could that everybody knows what is their task and what they could do. I also want to shortly, I know we are a little bit out of time already, shortly mention some challenges that we have at the border. Identification of children is a challenge, but also the referral of the children to the age verification procedures and the protection services is always a challenge. It is really hard to, when people are not documented, to see are they a child or not. Some children, they want to be identified as an adult and the other way around. So there's a lot of problems here. Also, to identify a child victim or a child survivor of THB is very hard for border guards. That is why we have the trainings, that's why we have the handbooks. But still, I personally think that most of the victims are at the border undetected. But maybe we can refer them with a lot of doubt to NGOs and service providers so that they can further do the identification process to have a better picture. Also, the capacity and the infrastructure in the border areas, and especially in the hotspots, is a concern. We, especially with high influx, we do not have enough places in the back for children, for victims, for survivors, so that they can be further handled. Then the division of labor between the hosting member states and Frontex is also sometimes it's difficult. Quite often the host member states, especially with very vulnerable groups like children, they like to do the things themselves. It's understandable, but that also immediately we see the capacity issue coming up. If we can redeploy officers, child experts, THB experts from other member states to these places, then we can support the member states that are facing the problems. But quite often, these sensible issues, hosting member states would like to have it under their own control. And then finally, the challenge that we have at the moment is the increase of unaccompanied children arriving at the EU external border. So again, we see, as was already mentioned, these 1,400 people arriving this weekend in the south of Italy. Also here, the share of unaccompanied children is increasing. So again, we face pressure on the border guards that are having to do the identification, but also after us, after we refer the people, is there enough place for the children to be further processed? So thank you very much. This was my contribution.
Thank you so much, Duko. Thank you so much as well for your very honest and open and practical account of the situation on the board, on the spot, and highlighting what are the challenges as well experienced. I'm sure that many people have found that very interesting as well. And unfortunately, we don't have any time left for any Q&A, which is a bit of a shame. I'm sorry about that, but I hope that you still enjoyed. I mean, I personally did, especially the contribution coming from the child awardees. Another thing that I would like actually to propose is that you can send any question that you're hiding, and I will make sure to send this. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Oh, okay, great. No, I was saying another thing that I can suggest is that I would ask all the awardees to may send some of the questions that they had in mind to raise during the Q&A session, to send them in writing, and I will make sure to send this question to the speakers. And through Child 10, I will try and facilitate the contact with the speakers today. Thank you so much for that. And again, thank you so much for the work done. Thanks, Jacob. Thank all the entire organization of Child 10. Thank Farial for all the help with the technical details. And thank all the speakers. Thank you so much for joining us today to this very interesting event. Thank you.